administration implied through this perspective that 75% of the oil was accounted for and consequently not harmful. And these, again, I can say were very, very debated numbers. Others, from my perspective, would say that this is the only thing that we really know, which is about 25%, how much was recovered by either from the wellhead, skimmed, or burned. The other part is estimated. So it's actually 75% remains in the environment. And are there any parts missing on this perspective? Well, we had another opportunity to go out in August, and we could ask still back in August. So this is 4 months after the beginning of the oil spill. And we could still come out and ask some basic fundamental questions. We were going to go in this area from the Deepwater Horizon into this region called the DeSoto Canyon. And if you were looking at Bob's models, you recognize this area is sort of a backwater. And there's slack water circulation up in that canyon. And it could be a region where there could be a lot of accumulation of petroleum. And so we decided to go into that sort of area. And the implications for Florida are relatively clear. As Bob recognized, if there's oil or waters that can upwell onto the continental shelf, indeed, if they're carrying oil or toxins with them, it's coming up there also. So some of the questions were, is there oil widely distributed on the seafloor? At that point, we hadn't heard anything. Does subsurface oil still exist? This was 2 months later, from end of May till the beginning of August. And is the subsurface oil or surface oil toxic? There had been no biological chemical interactions, nothing at the agencies, nothing had really provided any indication that the oil was either toxic or not. And then the question is, how far east had the subsurface oil moved? So first we were in this line that we were back in May. And there's an old-timer's technique for finding oil, and that's a UV lamp. It's an old, tried and true. You could go take it at home, you got your black light, you can just put a little oil on the floor and go watch it. But the idea is that you can really use that technique to recognize if there's oil. And indeed, although you would not see the oil on the surface, this one is from 2 meters water depth, this one is 1,000 meters water depth. They both have a significant amount of this sparkling, fluorescing material in them. And indeed, you don't see the oil on the surface, but it's there. And subsequent chemical analysis has proven that this is indeed oil. And as Ernst recognized, we were also collecting sediments and then irradiating them, and these things were shining back at us like a constellation of stars. And so, you can just imagine our amazement when this pops right back out at you. And this was consistent with the idea that there were micro droplets or very small droplets settling through the water column onto the sediment surface. But one of the most critical places to go for Florida was at the top of the DeSoto Canyon. And this is the reason is that, as Bob identified, water upwells from the DeSoto Canyon and is spread and distributed onto the continental shelf, where it provides cold waters and nutrients to support the primary productivity both on the shelf, on the substrate, in the sediments, but also in the water column. So if there was oil here, that's a really significant deal. And what we were going to do there was also conduct biological experiments on toxicity to see if indeed these waters were actually toxic or not. So when we went to the DeSoto Canyon again, what we found was a 15-meter thick layer. We were in 100 meters of water. And between 35 meters and 50 meters, 15 meters thick, we found this very, very prominent layer on the sonar. Back again, the backscatter was large. The large volume filtrations, we looked at all sorts of fluorescing particles. And subsequent to this, we've done work that's clearly recognizes this is subsurface oil. The same composition that we found from before is now sitting at the top of the DeSoto Canyon. John Paul, another distinguished university professor in biological oceanography who does marine microbiology, was on the August cruise. And that's a very interesting synergy to have the chemists and the biologists in interdisciplinary studies or in iterative studies working with each other. It's a fantastic opportunity. But what we were able to recognize, and what he brought with him was these chemical tests for toxicity, and he did them with organisms. They were like canaries in the coal mine. And so he did feeding experiments to these organisms to see how they would respond. And these organisms in particular did something quite tricky. They fluoresce. When they're happy, they produce light. But when they're not photosynthetically happy, they don't produce light. So the percent photosynthetic repression is really an indicator that it's having a toxic response. So when we fed these organisms, these very healthy organisms, these waters, indeed the PCB locations are the ones that are located off Panama City Beach at the DeSoto Canyon. And that's where we're showing some really strong repression, but also, again, the area closer to the wellhead was showing a lot of repression. So there's toxicity there from the waters. What's toxic? There's still these large, significant numbers of PAHs that are out there. But he conducted other tests, Jean Paul. Not only were these waters toxic, but they were also mutagenic. And so mutagenic is much more significant in its long-term impact because this can cause permanent genetic damage. And when you have permanent genetic damage, that's quite different. So what we were recognizing was that the smallest organisms were being hit. The phytoplankton, the bacteria, both at a toxic level but also at a mutagenic level. And so when you're talking about the relevant implications of a bottom-up alteration to the food web from the phytoplankton upward or a top-down, this is a pretty good indicator that it could potentially have a significant bottom-up effect. And again, once we recognized that there was subsurface oil now onto the continental shelf at the sediments and also in the water column, the whole scenario of delivering this oil onto the beaches of Florida could have become a reality and still can become a reality. Don't believe that it won't. There's a large area that makes up the DeSoto Canyon. And if indeed we're going out there in November, again, at the end of November, and we'll see how much subsurface oil is still in the DeSoto Canyon. If it's like it was, we could be contending with this for quite a while. Interestingly, the bottom water circulation, you can correct me, Bob, is about 1/10 to that one normally sees in that region in the DeSoto Canyon. So if you can magnify times 10 where things have gone or divided by 10, it's still calculated-wise, you could have an enormous amount of oil reservoir in this DeSoto Canyon. And so at the end, we were able to recognize that the sedimentary oil is distributed throughout the region. Subsurface oils are persistent and are present in all areas. The subsurface and surface oils are toxic, and the subsurface oils are in the DeSoto Canyon and moving. So what do we know and what still don't know? Or government nomenclature, known knowns and known unknowns. It's a pretty interesting, I know it's the Rumsfeld way. So, but this is sort of exactly what is really known knowns, is how much is being skimmed. And this collection is exactly what the known unknowns are. That is that there is still a lot at sea, and whether it was 25, all of these percentages you can forget. So this could indeed be, except for what you've collected here, this whole area still amounts to 75% of the oil. And there are still other things that have been considered. And those are the things called unknown unknowns. And things like the role of the sediments. The oil may not stay there or may cause some severe effects. Gas hydrates and hydrates, we haven't even talked about gases. Gases were about 50% of what came out of the Deepwater Horizon hole. Normally, when you're fined, a penalty for the release of petroleum, it's only liquid petroleum. That's a real consideration with the fining. But there's these PAHs, these polyaromatic hydrocarbons, and their breakdown products are extraordinarily toxic. Oftentimes more toxic than the primary polyaromatic hydrocarbon. There's other older products that are dispersant, and their whole concept of toxicity and mutagenicity. So I think with that, you can get a sense that it's a potpourri of things still out there. The chemistry is for real. Their interactions with the small organisms are for real. We'll be out there again